The other last thing, sorry, is when somebody's speaking, so when, Seena, you're going to go first, so when you're speaking, it probably would make sense for the rest of us to mute ourselves. The other people who in the audience, as it were, will be muted. They'll be unmuted when they ask a question. But you, obviously, we should ourselves. It'll pick up out external noises, so we can just mute ourselves if you. It doesn't matter if you don't, but if we can, we will. Okay.
Okay.
Right, well, my clock, as it is, has actually struck 2 p.m. So I think we might as well get going. My name is Peter Aldous. I'm MP for Waveney in Suffolk. I co-chair, along with Daniel Zeichner, who's with us as well, the APPG for the East of England. And this is our first virtual meeting. So welcome everyone to it. And I believe we've got a very good full audience out there, and also welcome to MP colleagues, welcome to attendees from business from across the region. Special thanks also to our sponsors, Anglian Water, the A120 Campaign Group, AstraZeneca, London Stansted, the East of England LGA and British Sugar. I think it's appropriate to be having this meeting today because this is the end of the second lockdown period. Cabinet have met this morning and the Prime Minister will be making his announcement to the nation on Sunday. So we'll know what the third phase is going to hold for us. Whatever that may be, I think now is an appropriate time to start discussing what we're calling the Great Recovery and the role that the East of England can play as that engine for so much of what goes on across our country in that recovery. And we've got 3 very good presentations today. What will happen is that Devo Connect and Steve, who provide our secretariat, they'll be taking detailed notes of the meeting. And at the end of that meeting, a letter will be sent to Steve Barclay, who is in the Treasury, Chief Minister there. He will we'll write to him. He's also an East of England MP, I would say for Wisbech, but I think it's North East Cambridgeshire. And we'll also send a copy of that letter to Alok Sharma, the Secretary of State at Bays. So that will immediately then give them a feedback of the issues and challenges that we face in the East of England, right across our region, and also what role we'll be playing in that great recovery. Now, to kick us off, we've got 3 very good speakers from across the region, from the business communities, and also from the local government community, who've been playing such a vital role in the community at this very important time. And they'll quickly go through. We've got Seena Shah, who's chair of the East of England FSB. Seena, great to see you there. We've got Jane Galvin. Jane was formerly the East of England chair for the CBI, and she's head of UK corporate banking at HSBC. So she'll be giving us a couple of very helpful insights there. And it's great to see that you're with us as well, Jane. And finally, we've got Councillor Lindy Haysey, who is the chair-elect, and I'm assuming those elections will take place in a virtual form, of the East of England LGA. So welcome, Linda, and she will be speaking as well. We'll then have questions, firstly from those MP colleagues who may be participating, then questions which have been notified to Steve and the Secretariat, and any brief 1-minute contributions that people may wish to make. And then Linda will be sort of summarising from a council perspective very much, and also Mark Breton, who's joining us as chairman of the Hearts LEP. He'll also make a few perspectives from a LEP perspective, because the LEPs will be playing an absolutely vital role in this recovery. We have a number across the region. They'll be linking up on that. So that's the programme for the next 55 minutes. And I'll start by now handing over to Seena to set out the perspective from the small business community, from the SMEs. Seena, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I think what I'd really like to start off with is many of us have really come to adapt and accept this as a new normal and under the current situation we're in. And whilst we've had that time to sit back, and quite a few of us have had that chance to really take a breath away from what we normally do, there's a couple of different things that have come up, particularly amongst the small business community. One is, I think it's highlighted the amount of uncertainty that businesses have endured over the last couple of years with Brexit and not having any clarity around that, but also how they've been forced to adapt in this current environment. So we're seeing business leaders put under extreme amounts of pressure. It's highlighted a lot of anxieties, whether it's personal finance security, whether it's decisions they're making for their workforce. And all of that does have a mental health impact, and I think that's something that's really important to consider at the moment. The other thing is, of course, moving and looking towards the future and focusing on this road to recovery. And for many small businesses, there's still a great deal of anxiety and distress and fear when they think about the future and the road to recovery, because they don't know what's going to happen. Like many of us, they don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic. They don't know what the guidelines are going to be. They don't know what changes are ahead of them. So having as much clarity and as much information and as much advice and guidelines as early on as possible, and really trying to give them as much certainty as we possibly can, is going to be really, really important. And it will empower them to make the decisions that they need to make about their business, and start to look at the possibilities that are available to them. I think the other thing as well is that we also need to accept that many of our small businesses operate in very unique ways. And we've seen this throughout the whole process when you suddenly start to find anomalies, for example, suppliers to the hospitality industry that don't fall within a specific category that's getting bundles of support, but is heavily impacted. And I think having a really flexible approach to how we support and categorise businesses and set guidelines as to how that support is distributed is really, really important. And I think that flexibility also extends to the job retention scheme. So as much as we would love to have a click of the finger overnight, everyone's back to normal, that the reality is it's not going to be that. And I think that the support needs to mirror that process. It's going to be a gradual process. It's going to be a gradual rollback to normality. And having some flexibility in how small businesses can bring people back off of furlough, maybe part-time, whether it's the on and off, to reflect what's going on, whether we can have a few hours a week, just so that we can start to get the order books filling up again and generate that cash flow that small businesses really do need. And I think it's really, really important to thank the government for everything that they have done so far. I know the FSB have been working really, really hard to feed their members' concerns over to number 10, and a lot of that has been adopted, and we really thank you for that. And small businesses have been overwhelmed with the amount of support both local communities have showed them, but also the government has shown, and I think they're just asking for that to continue, really. I think a really, really important point about the job retention scheme is that 60% of private sector jobs are with small businesses. The small businesses are a huge amount of that workforce, responsible for a huge amount of that workforce, and having the ability to bounce back and build recovery up in a slow way that mirrors what is the reality of the environment that we're in is going to be absolutely essential to seeing businesses recover long term. Thank you.
Right, Seena, many thanks for that introduction. As you said, the SMEs make up a significant number of percentage of the businesses in the East of England. That's very helpful. Sets the scene well. We now move on to Jane Galvin, to set the scene from the CBI perspective and possibly also bring in the bankers' feedback as well. Jane, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Well, to begin with, I'll briefly introduce my roles. I guess as you've mentioned, I'm Vice Chair of the CBI. So within the CBI, we represent all sizes of businesses. my remit of my role within HSBC and how this relates to COVID in particular, I oversee 12,000 clients, and the turnover of companies range from around 6.5 million to 350 million. So I guess we're now moving a size up the scale from those Seena talked about. And therefore all of the government loan schemes also fall under my umbrella in terms of how we're supporting clients. Today I thought I'd start by sharing how we're supporting businesses through the crisis, how HSBC has adapted to meet the challenges. And whilst I can't talk, of course, for other banks, you will know that all businesses are being supported by one bank in the East, in one frame of the other. But I thought I'd talk about our role in the recovery, because I think financial support for businesses is critical right now. Now, we've been involved in CBILS from the very beginning. And so far, we account in HSBC for around 19% of all CBILS lending approved by accredited lenders. Now, that does compare favourably given our market share for SME lending in the UK. And we've been pulling out all of the stops to help our customers get through this, to get these new schemes up and running, which has been challenging at times, but we're very, very focused to get money where it's needed. And while we're doing that, of course, we have to be very mindful of our regulatory duties to know the businesses, to guard against fraud and demonstrate a duty of care, because of course, this is the taxpayers' money after all. But within the financial businesses across East of England, you'll see teams would have been working through all weekends, morning through till late night to do this. And I think that CBILS is working well on the whole, actually. We've lent over £1 billion in funding at the moment, and we're processing eligible applications at pace. And whilst we were I think things moved quite slowly in the beginning, our online portal has received over 250,000 visits. We're picking up customer calls now within 15 seconds on average, and we are processing applications far more quickly now the systems are becoming more robust. We've also had some really deep conversations with businesses right across the UK who we're supporting, but I thought it would be useful to highlight one East of England business in particular, just to bring it to life a bit, and we have their permission to talk to them. Arena Group, they're an international events company which is headquartered in Cambridgeshire. They secured a £4.75 million loan to provide its colleagues and customers stability and support over the coming months. Now, the business needed to prepare for the cancellation and postponement of major sporting events right through until the end of May, and has already raised an additional £9.5 million in shareholder funds. Now, the additional funding that they've got from both us at HSBC and their shareholders is helping that business maintain a business as usual approach as much as possible as it navigates through the coming months. And it's also enabled the group to quickly implement the government's furlough scheme to support employees and ensure that no expertise is lost. And I'll perhaps come back to that point on furlough schemes in a moment, if I may. But I think, look, we, like many other banks and many other businesses, have had to transform the way we're doing business during the crisis. The speed of adjustment is unprecedented, certainly in our history, and I would imagine in all of our history listening into this. In a space of weeks, we moved 90% of our colleagues, that's around 36,000 people, to work from home. And that's been a real challenge for every single business, I would say, right across the region. We've also changed our processes, covering areas such as document signing, process changes, authorising payments to support colleagues while working from home. And at the same time, we've been helping many businesses look to see how they can adapt their processes and where we can learn from each other. Those companies that are able to allow e-signature have been working with us, as I'm sure they have many of the professional services firms across the East of England as well. And we shouldn't underestimate the amount of time and focus that businesses have had to spend on doing this. I'd certainly say there were teething problems with the emergency measures. We've certainly had some ourselves, and there are still challenges in explaining the details of the different government schemes. But we've worked really closely with the industry and government, and I want to thank any of the MPs on the phone listening in today who have helped and supported us as well, the regulators, British Business Bank, to iron out problems to make sure we can stand behind businesses in the UK. Certainly not everything's perfect. We are certainly not complacent. We have colleagues working again right over this bank holiday weekend, but I'm pleased with the way our business has risen to the challenge so far. We need to keep up momentum. We need to keep getting messages out to business customers, because I think what we've seen is great collaboration through this of government, the financial services sector, UK finance, really working together to support businesses. The thing that's pleased me the most actually is just seeing how resilient and how forward-thinking businesses are. But if I come on to think about our role in the economy, and I guess my asks of anyone listening on the phone that can help business today is companies are really seeking clarity regarding how long the restrictions linked to COVID-19 are expected to last. But they appreciate it's really difficult to quantify. In the meantime, they're scenario planning for different outcomes and sharing these with the banks in order to reset existing arrangements and seek support where needed. For some, the revenue and cost lines are relatively straightforward to model, but time of impact and speed with which the market recovers are the key unknowns. I spoke to a hospitality and leisure company just yesterday, and they were planning now not to really go into major recovery for 12, 18 months' time. And that's a huge gap from where we are now, really. So I think, it would be good for businesses to have greater line of sight in terms of furlough schemes as well. I think they're really seeking some clarity around that. But companies are also looking at their business models and challenging themselves on whether they're fit for purpose once we move into the new normal. More people are used to working from home and now loving working from home. So what impact will that have on real estate right across the regions? Because businesses are looking at the adjustments they need to make for future business success. I thought I'd share an interesting stat with you. 75% of our customers say cash flow has been impacted from COVID. And I'm sure that figure in itself won't surprise you. But we do believe that CBILS and Cllr bills, and of course bounce back loans now, they're playing through, will play a key role in supporting businesses and have a huge, wider UK impact as well. We do see that the current schemes are helping businesses to stay afloat. I could quote numerous examples of emails, letters, phone calls we've had that I've spoken to clients personally who have been in tears over the support that they're getting, and actually tears of joy, I will hasten to add as well. But looking 3 to 4 months ahead, we may need more mechanisms to restructure some of this debt to ensure the business's longer term viability. Some of them are looking at the short term, as I say, up to 12 months or 18 months. We will advise against putting pressure on businesses to repay loans early, even if businesses can pay, because I think it will discourage investment and growth. And I think businesses have got to look at what opportunities they can source from this. So we will work with them to look at longer term funding structures. And I think that's really important to support a recovery. And the last point I'll make on here, if I may, is that equity will be an important part of this scenario. And I would ask that HM Treasury should consider how it could use tax incentives for business owners and private investors to increase the financial and operational capacity for private companies over the short and medium term. In other words, really, we've got to encourage businesses to invest beyond the recovery into long-term growth. And I think particularly here in the East of England, we've been focused on that longer-term growth for a long time. We don't want this to stop that flow. We've got through recessions before, we will get through this one, but everyone's eyes are on what's happening now. We've got to have that longer-term lens. So we are encouraging HM Treasury to continue to work with us and the industry really on the next phase. I could talk forever, but I won't, Peter. I thank you for the time to express those views today, and let me hand back to you.
And very many thanks for that. That was a very helpful oversight from a banking perspective and looking at the longer term fiscal framework that government need to provide. Our final main speaker is Councillor Linda Haysey. Linda is, as I said, Chair-elect of the East of England LGA. Local government have been in the vanguard of the movement to really to get out an awful lot of that support, and also in the community as well. So, Linda, look forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
Am I muted still? No, thank you. No, thank you, Peter, for the acknowledgement of what the local authorities have had to do in a very short period of time, in fact, and just what they have achieved. You know, we've done things like distributing food parcels, been in contact with the residents who are in the SHIELD programme and also the SUSTAIN programme. We've kept the delivery of PPE up to as well. Where it's existed, we've been able to deliver it, but there hasn't always been sufficient supplies of it, and there still aren't. And I think also we've done a lot to ensure that the grants have gone out to businesses in a way that is as, again, it's coming back down to it's public money, and we have to be as sure as possible that those who have applied to us for those business grants are businesses that actually exist. And I think we have to be careful as to where this might lead us when we do the wrap up at the end and have to account for some of this money. As a council, we have all tried to do business as usual. So again, it's moving everybody into working from home within the first week, making sure that as far as possible, the bins were collected, the grass was cut, and it's all those other things that our residents pay council tax for and expect to see. And I think we've now got to the stage where business as usual is still the norm, but we have to look forward as to where we might well be able to take some of these changes through in the future. We've also been very impressed with how our residents have taken to the modal shift in terms of working through the websites and contact through emails, etc. And in fact, our phone call numbers have actually gone down recently, except when we've been trying to work with those who are looking for universal credit. And I think that this breadth of work has been acknowledged by the Secretary of State. I sit in on many phone calls, like I'm sure you all do, and we are all thanked enormously. The only thing I would say is that sometimes the initiatives come out without necessarily the clarity on how those initiatives actually need to be implemented. So again, if the MPs who are listening to this, if you're able to go back and just say, can we have the clarity at the same time as we get the initiative, it would help us enormously. So we've done a lot with businesses in helping them to keep going as far as possible. We are looking at how do we help at this change of skills base that will be needed going forward. And I think certainly Mark Breton from the Hertfordshire Let will probably touch on that later on, because we found that a number of our businesses, because they are SMEs, they're incredibly entrepreneurial, but they have not really developed the resilience and the depth of resilience to actually get through something like this. And a number of them are discovering that they do need a new skill set. And that's what we hope to be able to give them. So we've all had a very quick learning curve on how we change communicating with people. And I think it's highlighted just how important the digital infrastructure is going to be. I'm very lucky. I live in a leafy part of Hertfordshire, but the Wi-Fi and the broadband is appalling. So it is, again, it's not just roads and buildings that we need to look at. It is the digital infrastructure that we need to make sure is actually the basic utility, which I believe we are all entitled to, but it's still got quite a way to go. The other thing that is very important is obviously ensuring that the mental health and the physical health of our employees as a council across the area are looked after. As Jade has said, and Seena, is that a number of people are working very long hours, and because they can't really get out, even though they may take a day's holiday, what does that day's holiday actually mean? It means probably doing exactly what you've done for the other 6 days and the 12 hours that you've been working. And certainly our Rebs and Bens colleagues have been doing weekends right the way across Easter and just making sure that we can get those grants out. So I think there's going to be quite a lot that we have to do for the workforces, for their mental health and well-being going forward. And a lot of it, in Hertfordshire, we've set up a thing called the Community Reassurance Cell, which is part of the LRF. And again, it's looking at, are we expecting suicide rates to go up? Are we expecting post-traumatic distress syndrome to start coming through in the months ahead? And how do we cope with all of that? Because none of us can carry on doing the sorts of things that we've had to do in the last 6 to 8 weeks. And a lot of it will have to carry on again. Obviously, there are major concerns about domestic abuse and the number of children who may well be experiencing abuse at home, both mental and physical. Certainly, the number of children that we had expected to go to school as a safe place to go and who were entitled to go to schools, they just haven't been there. So whereas historically they would have seen school as the safe place, they've not been there and they have not had the support from the schools, which they really needed. Also, volunteers. You know, within Hertfordshire, just as an example, we had 5,000 people volunteer to help. Now, at the moment, we've not been able to deploy all of them because there isn't that amount of work that we need doing at the moment. However, the batch of volunteers who have been working like mad need to have some space, and we need to develop the next batch of volunteers to carry on what they're doing. And that's an extraordinary resource that we need to make sure that we use and enjoy and give them the ability to enjoy what they're doing and perhaps open up new areas of charity work or volunteering work, which is something else that's going to be coming through. One of the other unseen benefits of this is the environment. I think the environment has been moved rapidly up the government's agenda, and we see it as a key area for a lot of the work that we're going to be doing going forward. The air is clean, it is quiet, you can hear the birds sing if you're lucky enough to be outside. And so these are things which I think people are going to start seeing as an aspect of enjoying life. But how will people start travelling again? We don't know. Obviously, the East of England has done an enormous amount of work on with Greater Anglia and with four-tracking. Are people going to be commuting to the same extent, especially into London, or not? Are people going to go on buses? No idea. So are we going to need to have a very different way of looking at how we transport people around and how they want to be transported? Could well be that, in fact, car numbers go up because people just aren't prepared to go onto public transport. So again, these are all questions which I think we are all grappling with at the moment. And some people are enjoying working from home, and it really suits some people and some jobs, but it doesn't suit everybody. And so therefore, I think all of us as organisations, either private, public or local authority, have to be able to have that flexibility of helping people work in the best way that they are able to work, because then it's a win-win all the way round. So I think that's where I want to go. I can conclude at the end when there's a level of summing up. So thank you.
Linda, very many thanks for that. That was a very helpful I think, what I describe as whistle-stop tour, and you raised some very important issues which, you know, we've got to grapple with. Transport was one that immediately comes to mind. And I think all three speakers highlighted the need for clarity, the need for flexibility, and also the mental health implications of the way so many people have had to change the way they worked in pretty extremely stressful circumstances. We've now got questions, and I did have Daniel sending something over. I wasn't sure, Daniel, whether you wanted to go first with a question or you wanted to take over in the chair, so to speak.
Good afternoon, Peter and everybody. No, I certainly don't want to take over in the chair. You're doing a splendid job. But I did have a question or contribution. I'd thank all three speakers. One of the things that I've found difficult through this period is that all MPs have had an unprecedented, I think, number of communications from concerned constituents, but we're doing it far more isolated in our own patches than usual. So to hear the consistent messages that are coming across the region is actually really rather helpful. The point about seeking clarity for the future, I think we're all hearing that. And without in any way being party political, I think I quite understand why it's difficult for any government to do that. But we do need it soon for the reasons that have been outlined by the speakers. And that's something we can feed back. I would say that in my experience, Parliament isn't working very well at the moment. The virtual Parliament is better than no Parliament, but I don't know whether Peter and others would agree with this. It's proving very difficult to have the normal kind of conversations that we'd have both with colleagues and directly with government. So, but we'll do our best to feed that back. Two questions coming partly from the presentations. First one picks up a bit from what Linda was saying at the end about the very small number of people being prepared to send their children to school. And I think it reflects what to me is going to be a wider problem, which is I'm not sure that significant parts of the workforce are going to feel confident about returning to work. And I think it'll be different in different sectors and in different places. But I just particularly to Jane from the CBI and perhaps to Seena from small businesses, what kind of thing, do you agree with me, first of all? And what kind of measures do you think would give people the confidence? I mean, I guess it does come back to PPE, social distancing and so on. But what I'm hearing, I hear a lot of very worried and anxious people, frankly, contacting me. And the second question, again, following up a bit from Linda, obviously our region is not unique, but being around London, huge numbers of people going in and out, and that extends certainly as far as Cambridge, thousands going both ways. I rather agree that I think we might see some certainly short to medium term, quite substantial changes in patterns, which will have quite a knock-on effect, not just on our transport system, but on all the businesses and so on that feed on those commuters and travellers. And what can we do as a region, first of all, to work out what's going on? Have we got the data? And then what and who can help those people through that transformation? Because it does look a bit like a cliff edge to me for a lot of people.
Right, Daniel, many thanks for those questions. Who wants to go first? Jane, did you want to go first on those two issues?
I think you'd like me to go first, Peter, so indeed I'm very happy to. So, look, I think they're both quite interlinked, really. From what we hear from businesses is they want clarity, but I think perhaps if I turn this on its head, one of the things we're looking at as a business is what are the dependencies we would need to give people that comfort. So, for example, you know, do we start by saying that we'll have no more than 10% of our employees in any one building at any time? And how do we create the space in the building so that they can have social distancing to be able to walk around the building? Do we need to put screens up in the building for walkways? You know, particularly at a time when we've just about got all of our offices open plan, we're now saying that we want to put some form of social distancing in. So we are starting to look at that now. What we have done is we've put a pulse survey out to all of our colleagues. We opened it this week, it's open for 2 weeks, asking them a dozen questions about how they're feeling about working from home. What are the pros, what are the cons, what would they like coming back to work to look like, and actually what would they expect to see in place to help inform us. I think the thing is, we all imagine that the leaders of any business or the leaders, you know, members of parliament have all the answers. They don't. We have to help create this together. So we're starting to look at that. we also have dependencies, because until we know that transport gets up and running, we can't even begin to think about bringing people back into the business as well. So I think what would be helpful to see is a bit of a map out of the sorts of considerations that have to be made to give people that comfort. I guess testing will form a part of that, but I'm certainly no expert on that, so I'm not going to comment. But if in the absence of that, for me, it has to be how we can allow people to social distance, to allow them to move around the region and around their offices.
That's great. Thanks for that, Jane. Seena.
I suppose it's very difficult to ask for clarity. You know, it goes back to what I originally said. Yes, businesses do want clarity. They want as much clarity as they can get, but we are living in a time when that's not always a luxury we can afford. Particularly when you look at small premises buildings. So you might have a local shop that hasn't got a lot of space. You know, what are they to do around some of these social distancing guys? You know, if you're in a small office building because you're sort of full to the brim and you're a growing small business, what should you be doing? You know, and having some advice and clear guidelines around how we can work safely and keep our businesses open in a safe way would be really, really helpful.
That's very helpful for that, Seena. Thank you very much for that. And Linda, your perspective on Daniel's two questions.
Yes, thank you. I think most of us now are working with task forces to help to help businesses understand how they can open up, because I think that's a very important role that local government can play. So a lot of it is just going to be, shall we say, common sense. We don't necessarily need the government to tell us how to do it. We just need to make sure that we're abiding by the current rules that are coming out. I think also in terms of transport, again, it's going to be chicken and egg. If I look at any of the planning developments that we've got coming out across the area, how do we do transport surveys? How do we work out what the traffic's going to be and the impact of the new development on the traffic flow? So there's an awful lot of other things which are going to start knocking into where or what we can do. But I think a lot of it has to be common sense, and working with businesses to say this can work, that can't work, working with the police, working with
looks as if we've got a
Highways Authority, making sure that there's going through the extraordinary, without going through the extraordinary bureaucracy of how do you close a road. So,
Linda, many thanks for that. And Daniel, thanks for those questions. And next up, we've got Julie Marson. Julie, I think you've got a question as well. Welcome here.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you, everyone. It's really good to hear what everyone's got to say. I'm not sure if I've got a question, but I find it really interesting to hear what everyone said. So I really do want to contribute. And I think, you know, as a relatively new MP as well, I mean, it has been a baptism of fire, but it's been absolutely amazing how our communities, the local authorities, the banks, the businesses across the board, and our community groups have responded to this unprecedented situation we're all in. And I think that we need to pay tribute to so many people in that. I mean, I had a Zoom conference, if you like. I joined the staff meeting of a major company employer in my constituency last week. And there are people going into work every day. Some of them, you know, it's a scary prospect at times, and I think we need to acknowledge that it's frightening for some people to have to do that, and yet they're doing it willingly. They're in an area where they're providing really key medical resources and facilities, and they really know that what they're doing is important, and I think it's really important that we acknowledge that and acknowledge their contribution. And that goes across the board. And it's a really situation where the shape of the curve is led by a virus. And I don't think that we've ever had to face anything like that. I sit on the Treasury Select Committee, and we've had a lot of input from economists. And I think it's fair to say we don't know whether the curve is going to be a tick that we would like, whether it's going to be a U shape, whether it's going to look like a square root sign, or something that we can't even find an equivalent for. And I think it's fair to say, I'm not speaking for the government, but I think it's fair to say that we're relatively limited in what monetary policy we can respond with, and that also austerity is not going to feature in the government plans from now on. It's going to be a different response to this situation. I can see Daniel's reaction to that. But also, it's important to acknowledge the size and the scope of the support that the government has done so far. But I take Linda's point about the clarity that's needed sometimes when the schemes are announced. And I also think Seena makes a really important point about how we come off of that kind of system, because we're going to need to look at different industries, not all as one amorphous lump. And I think there's going to have to be a more tapered individual approach taken to that. And I think that's really, really important. And I'll be really interested to hear from Mark Breton, because I think LEPs are going to have a really key role to play in our recovery as a region. And I think it'll be really interesting to hear his view on how the LEPs work together and how they liaise with different parts of our business and our communities. And I think, the areas that we're going to have to look for are infrastructure, like you say, Linda, not necessarily the same infrastructure, but broadband, how that new infrastructure looks, supply chains. I think that's going to be a really important resilience issue, productivity, and not just across the board, productivity, including some left behind areas throughout the region. So, I haven't really got a question, but I'm really interested to hear what the LEPs and what other people have got to contribute. And it's an amazing challenge we've got, but I know we can meet it.
Julie, that's a very helpful perspective. Steve, have we got any other MPs wanting to have their say?
No, we've got Mike Sargent, who wants to ask a question about universities, and we've also then got Mark. But obviously, if other people would like to indicate, especially MPs, but anybody, that would be helpful. Through the chat button, I think, is probably the best way.
Yeah. Do we want to hear from Mark? So, Mark, did you want to say from your perspective, from the LEP perspective?
Good. Good afternoon, everybody. Really delighted to have the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. As well as being the chair for Hertfordshire, I'm actually also the chair of the national network. And so some of what I'm going to say I think will help answer some of the broader perspectives of what the collective is up to. And Linda's been on my board, I think, ever since I took my job as chair in Hertfordshire on the day of the Brexit vote back in 2016. So we've worked together very closely in some of this time. I think we've approached the things here really in kind of three phases. First of all, there's a whole thing about helping businesses survive today and making sure that we've been taking back into central government the voice of business, what we hear through the growth hubs, and every LEP has a growth hub, which is a key part of the communication channel between business and back into government. Working very closely with FSB, CBI, Chambers of Commerce, because everybody has a perspective to bring here. And I think that collaboration was something which, when I took over as the national chair, we were keen to promote, but has really been accelerated by the crisis. So I think everything to do with the survival is key, but also recognizing, and I had my previous deputy chair used to run a big chunk of Santander in the region. So when all the issues were coming out, as Jane will know from the banking element early on, wanted to get, what needs to be fixed to help the banks do their work. And so bringing some of that business focus and understanding in has been good. across the country, every LEP has run a series of schemes, interventions to try and help businesses where there have been gaps. Certainly, we've put some things in place in Hertfordshire. There's more to come. Also helping local government with this massive task they've had to pay out the grants, because it's, you know, you're normally accepting money in from businesses, not paying money out, and collectively trying to help you with the more difficult ends of the challenge of, well, how do you find these businesses? Again, it's something where we've got a key piece of work to do. So that's been around recovery, but we've also been, you know, somebody raised a question in the chat about universities. You know, we're very close to our FE, HE and apprentice scheme providers, and there have been a number of things which we've spotted, which we've taken back in, and you'd have seen some improvements to the support for apprentice providers. You'd have seen some support for universities. I actually had a thank you letter for that, which is good to see, for some of the work we've done. We're not taking all the credit, but doing some of those things helps quite a bit. If I then turn my mind into the next stage, which is about, well, how do we emerge from this stronger and better? And this is where I want to put my Minister of Hope hat on here, because I think business has a firm role to play here. Every LEP produced a local industrial strategy, and we did probably the most thorough economic analysis that underpinned each of those strategies. So we've got a really great handle on the economy, which we're in the process of updating. And I'm an ex-military guy, so doing things in a kind of a cool, calm, collected, planned way is even more important when times are difficult. So making sure that we've really understood the local economy, flowed into that, the things that we learned today will allow us to do 2 or 3 important things. First of all, make sure that we really understand the sector differences. And across this region, we've got very different groups of sectors, with airports to farms to retail and so on. And we have expertise in all of these key sectors. Understanding how to mobilize those supply chains, because if Boris says on Sunday you can start work on Monday, there's a practical piece of how do you get the supply chain rev back up again and stimulate the demand that helps to draw from that. So making sure that those things are there and relevant. And then when we've made these interventions, we want to measure success against them, so that if we are going to channel some more precious funds, they're hitting the mark. So that's the whole thing around the recovery for this. And I think the other thing not to forget, and I think the point's been raised, it's very easy for some of us to work from home, but that option is not available to people who have to go and work in a shop, work in a factory, deliver things to your front door, drive a train. So how do we make sure that we've really understood the return to work process for people? We were engaged in helping review some of those workplace procedures that were trailed in the news over the weekend, trying to put some practical things into that, even down to what happens if somebody has an accident at work. How do you give somebody CPR in a very different scenario from what we've been used to? How do you give somebody confidence to help a colleague? And so, you know, working again over the next few weeks now, I'm sitting on a Simon Clarke's Economic Recovery Group, which has got a political representation from LGA and from some of the metro mayors, an informal group to discuss some of the real practicalities. I think I would just leave you with one message, I think, which I've seen over the last few weeks, is historically trying to marshal all of these different entities would have been a task in itself. And I think somebody said this a bit earlier on about just the level of collaboration here. You know, I look after a group of 38 LEPs. You know, trying to get 38 people to agree anything is very difficult, as you can see. None of that now. We have a regional board, it functions, it's delivering, we're making some significant interventions, but we're not doing that alone. And I think that level of collaboration, if one thing is going to emerge out of the last few weeks, I think is a key item for hope, and it will allow us to make some of those interventions much more effective and give people the confidence they need to get back to work. And LEPs are absolutely committed, and there are 300 odd business leaders here, along with our local government colleagues, HEFE, third sector, are determined to play their part.
Mark, that's a very helpful oversight and overview of the whole situation. I think the point, one of the first points you made was what what I would just highlight was the need for collaboration and the fact that you, the LEPs, do have an awful lot of information, having prepared your industrial strategies on what is going on in your own separate areas and in so many different sectors of the economy. And that is important, that government do actually buy into and tap into your knowledge base and work with you. So I think that was a very helpful overview there, which is much appreciated. Steve, have we got anyone else who wants to say a few words before we bring Linda back in?
Hello. Yeah, I think there's Mike Sargent has indicated he'd like to ask a question, Peter. And
that is great. Yeah, my apologies for not picking that up. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, sorry, we had an excellent meeting in Cambridge last night. Mike Sargent, Deputy Leader at Cambridge City Council, had an excellent meeting last night with businesses. And one of the big issues that was raised was the fact that we won't be having many visitors coming to Cambridge in the next 2 years, perhaps. You know, we certainly won't be perhaps having the Chinese visitors coming, and it's about 9% of our economy. But I've heard some very worrying information this week about what the potential impact will have on universities. You know, some universities may not actually come back in the way that we traditionally have seen them this year. If students are working from home, for instance, that may well have a massive impact on the local economies, let alone the fact that we may well find less people want to come and study, so undergraduates may defer for a year. And we may also see, in the case of Cambridge, that 15–20% of the students won't come at all from other countries. So, you know, I think we've got to be very careful about how we look at the impact of these unknowns, if you like. We've got a fair idea that visitors won't be coming, but we don't have an idea yet what the impact will be in terms of universities coming back this September, October.
Mike, very many thanks for that perspective. I think it's a very important one, both obviously from the visitor economy, and that's obviously very important from myself representing a coastal constituency. And I'm getting an awful lot of emails and calls from businesses, very big, and also some extremely small ones as well. But they're all have got a real challenge there. But you've also highlighted the role of our universities, and actually we forget about that, because I think when you look at obviously look at the Cambridge area, the Cambridge sub-region, also Norwich and also Colchester, the universities are right at the centre of those economies there, and you know that's a point well made, which I'm sure that Steve is will pick up in the letter we do send to both Steve Barclay and Alok Sharma. Time is ticking on. I'm looking at Steve just for organisation, but I think now is the time probably to bring Linda back into.
Sorry, can I just say, Peter, there is one more question. Maybe we can take.
So I missed the University of Bedfordshire as well. I done the University of Suffolk. Yes, that's fine.
Yeah, Rachel Hopkins and Javira Hussain. Maybe we could just take two quick comments.
My apologies.
Sorry. I think you're on, Councillor.
Oh, hello there. This is Councillor Javeria here from Luton. Thank you so much to the panel for such an informative and a very critical discussion. Just want to seek the panelists' views quickly on something I think which is really important. As we all know, the ONS stats published today have confirmed that Public Health England's findings on the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on the BAME communities. So a specific government strategy is going to be needed, as far as I'm concerned, post-COVID recovery to tackle and address the socio-economic inequalities faced by these communities in terms of jobs, housing, education, health, and so on. Like in places like Luton and Peterborough, we all know BAME communities make up large proportions of the local workforce as key workers in local income jobs, as owners of SMEs, or in the self-employed cab trade. I mean, it would be really good to hear the views of the panel and the role, the region's sectors such as public, private education sector can play in this. Thanks.
Javiria, many thanks for that. And if I could just look to our panelists to take on the point that Javiria has raised there.
I'm happy to start on this. I think it is something that we as in local authorities are very aware of, and we have to be very sure and careful that we are all inclusive and that as far as possible we do create wealth which is applicable and is distributed in a way that it should be distributed across all our groups.
Seena, any particular, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us would agree that it's important to make sure that every group, no matter whether it's to do with the race or their creed or whether there's a disability, I think it's really, really important that we're looking after all members of our society, and whether that's providing the right PPE, making sure we're providing the right kind of education. I think it's important across everything, and small businesses can play a role in that as well, whether it's sticking up a poster. There's so many ways that we can all work together as a community to make sure that's delivered.
Great. Jane.
And perhaps the only thing I would add, I'd say, is that I think we look at all of our different employee groups in terms of how we can provide different levels of support based on the facts that we have at the moment. Of course, it's Ramadan, so we are being very, supportive of colleagues celebrating that whilst working long hours as well. And I think if there are some facts that come out, forgive me, I haven't seen what's come out today, but if there are facts we need to take into account that we haven't already, we certainly rely on as much factual information as we can. But in terms of business support, we support all types of business at every single level and support in the best way possible, often wider than just financial support as well.
Many thanks for that, Jane. Steve, have we got any more questions there?
No, I don't think so. I think so. I think one of the advantages, technically we've only got 4 minutes left, but if we were in Parliament, now there would be someone knocking at the door and we would be well into Fergie time and it would be necessary for us to finish. But when we're in our own homes, we haven't got quite that pressure. But I'm conscious other people have got other things to do. But if I can just look to, firstly, to Linda to sum up from the community perspective, and then Seena and Jane to say a few words from summing up from their view, and then we'll seek to bring things to a conclusion. So, Linda, over to you.
I think the words I would use is we will get through this. Things will be different. We will learn to adapt, but we can only do it if we all work together. And it is that collaboration and that mutual respect that we have to ensure stays and continues where we are.
Thanks very much for that, Linda. And Seena?
Thank you. Just a gentle reminder that small businesses in this country employ 60% of our private sector workforce. We're incredibly important to our economy. We want to keep our employees employed. And any support and flexibility in that support that you can offer from a governmental point of view would be really, really important. And let's not forget that mental health is incredibly important now, and it will continue to be important moving forward as well.
That's greatly appreciated there. Many thanks indeed, Seena. And Jane?
So I guess my last summing up would be know that we at HSBC are working as hard as we can to get as much money out of the door to support. And the ask we'd like back in terms of support is that consideration is given to extending the furlough scheme and also helping provide equity support for the private equity investors. And then together, we'll just look to the future.
Great. Jane, many thanks for that, and many thanks to everyone for contributing. I'll now hand over. What I would say is that Devo Connect have been taking notes of everything we've said, and that will be incorporated in a letter to go to both Steve Barclay and Alok Sharma. And I think, Steve, you just wanted to have the final word to just tell us about what's coming up as far as the East of England APPG is concerned.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Peter. And yeah, we will do a letter, and also there'll be a fuller minute of the meeting, obviously, in due course. Just to say, I think, given that this, I think, does work, I'm really pleased to see there were 68 people logged on at one point. So there's a lot of interest. I think with Zoom, you have to stick to about an hour, but I think we'll try and do another session probably in June, and probably around health innovation and improvement. So I think we'll be looking forward from health. There are some important health developments happening in terms of children's hospitals planned and other innovation. And of course, AstraZeneca are right at the heart of the response that we've got and hoping to have to COVID-19 as well. So hopefully hear from them. I think that will be interesting, but in a kind of context of looking forward again to this recovery and moving on. The other thing is, I just wanted to say, we have got plans, there are plans, and in fact there's a booking for an event, for a reception for the East of England with APPG, with the LGA, which is currently scheduled for the 15th of September in the Terrace Pavilion. I have to say that although that hasn't been cancelled yet, I am thinking it's probably likely, but we will give you a further update at the next meeting, at which point I think by June we'll have to say whether we're going to go ahead or not. I think with social distancing it might be tricky until we actually are perhaps got a vaccine, but yeah, we will keep you posted on that. So I hope that's helpful.
Steve, that's greatly appreciated. Many thanks for all you at Devo Connect to keep the APPG on the road. I think that's all. We've actually only gone a minute over. So many thanks to everyone. I hope everyone found that helpful. Certainly from my perspective, it was very useful to listen to the challenges that they're taking place all across the region, but also the ideas coming out of this. And I think the needs, I would just say, transparency, flexibility, and collaboration, and working together. And doing that, we will get out of this. Very many thanks indeed. Afternoon.